From loudly sobbing in the courtroom to arrogantly laughing at the victims' families, these teen criminals carried out some of the worst crimes known to humanity. They committed their crimes without any remorse, yet wanted the courts to acquit them because of their age. But the law does not look at age, so here are the emotional reactions of teens sentenced to life in prison. Aiden Fucci.
Only a very small few that had this level and this type of impact on the community.
On May 9th, 2021, Tristan Bailey's family went to wake her up. The 13-year-old middle schooler was not in her room, the window was open, and no one had seen or heard from her since last night. Her family immediately reported her as missing, and investigators began search efforts. This was unlike Tristan, who had been excited to spend Mother's Day with her family and did not have a history of disappearing. When Dofis Absher heard that Tristan was missing, he informed the police that his friend, 14-year-old Aiden Fucci, had asked for Tristan's phone number just last night. CCTV footage showed Tristan leaving her home, meeting up with Aiden, and going with him toward a residential parking lot. Tristan's phone also logged a text from Aiden at around 2 in the morning, asking her to meet him. Aiden was questioned by the police, and he claimed that after hanging out with Tristan that night, he left while she claimed she had to meet up with other friends. However, according to the surveillance footage from that night, Aiden ran from the parking lot barefoot, while there was no evidence to show that Tristan ever left after the cameras lost sight of her. He claimed that they had met up at Dofis's home, taken a walk together, and then he left about 30 minutes later. However, when investigators pointed out that Dofis's home and the parking lot where they were seen were far away from one another, he changed his story. Now, Aiden was claiming that Tristan tried to inappropriately touch him, he shoved her, and she hit her head. He still claimed he did not know where she was. When police were transporting Aiden in the cop car, he started making fun of the situation, posting a video on Snapchat asking Tristan to come back. However, by 6 in the evening, someone had found Tristan's body. She had been stabbed over 100 times, with the autopsy confirming that she had suffered at least 50 of those wounds post-mortem. She also had the word karma drawn out on her ankle and a smiley face beside it. Aiden was arrested, but he seemed completely unfazed by the arrest. While his parents cried, he could not understand what the big deal was. Upon digging deeper into Aiden's social history and wondering why he would unalive Tristan, his friends revealed that it was a thrill unaliving, and that Aiden had made it clear he would search for at least one victim that month, no matter what. The trial officially began in June, with Aiden pleading no contest to the charges. The defense argued that Aiden had an undiagnosed mental illness. However, the state's expert witness, a clinical psychologist, claimed that in all of her interactions with Aiden, he refused to show any remorse for what he had done. She claimed that he was beyond rehabilitation. The judge called it one of the worst cases he had ever presided over, calling Aiden a cold-blooded unaliver. In 2023, at age 16, Aiden Fucci was sentenced to the maximum punishment permissible under Florida law, life in prison with no chance of parole. Ethan Crumbley.
To those in the gallery, please be seated until he is exited.
On November 30th, 2021, the students at Oxford High School were going about a normal Tuesday when the unthinkable happened. 15-year-old Ethan Crumbley entered a bathroom with a backpack, emerged with a semi-automatic handgun his parents had bought him just days prior, and began firing into the hallways. By the time the smoke cleared, 4 students had lost their lives, and 7 others were injured. Investigations quickly revealed that Ethan had documented the plans in his journal, detailing how he wanted to cause maximum pain, and even filming himself the night before, declaring that he was going to be the next school shooter. Unlike some defendants who show more emotional reactions during court, especially when they're facing life in prison, Ethan just appeared in a daze, sat in his orange jumpsuit and thick glasses. However, any sympathy for him was shattered when the court played the evidence of his cold-blooded unaliving. The case took an even more dramatic turn when his parents, James and Jennifer Crumbley, were charged with involuntary manslaughter for their role in giving him access to the weapon, a first in American legal history. Despite the defense's attempt to point toward his troubled home life and mental health struggles, the judge was unmoved by the argument. He noted that Ethan had every opportunity to walk away, but chose to execute his classmates instead. By 2023, Ethan Crumbley was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Tevin Biles Thomas. On New Year's Eve in 2018, a party at an Airbnb in Cleveland, Ohio, turned into a horrific scene. Apparently, a group of uninvited guests showed up at the party. They were asked to leave, and in the chaos that followed, someone had unalived 3 people. That someone was Tevin, an active-duty Army marksman and the brother of Olympic gymnast Simone Biles. Throughout the legal process, the media spotlight was blinding. Because of his famous sibling, the world was watching when the trial finally reached its boiling point in June 2021. Delvante Johnson, Toshawn Banks, and Devaughn Gibson were the 3 young men who had been unalived. According to Tevin's attorneys, there was not enough evidence to suggest that Tevin had indefinitely been the one to pull the trigger. What made the case even more viral was the fact that it seemed like it was open and shut. Tevin had gotten into an altercation with the 3 men. There were multiple witnesses to the fact he had threatened to unalive them, and then they were unalived. There was more than enough to convict him. Yet, in a move no one saw coming, Tevin was acquitted and cleared of all charges. Everyone in the courtroom gasped, and Delvante's mother, overcome with grief, tried to lunge at Tevin, screaming, "You unalived my baby!" Tevin was rushed out of the courtroom, while sheriffs tackled Delvante's mother to the ground. While Tevin Biles Thomas eventually had his charges dismissed because the prosecution couldn't prove which person in the chaotic dark of the party actually pulled the trigger, the case made headlines for the next several weeks. Nicholas Cruz.
Something very important to tell you, you're charged with some very serious crimes. You have the right to remain silent. If you give up that right at any time during this hearing, whatever you say can and will be used against you in the prosecution of this case.
19-year-old Nicholas Cruz entered Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, carrying a black duffel bag containing a semi-automatic rifle in Parkland, Florida. He did not have a target in mind. The goal was never to unalive anyone in particular, it was just to cause as much panic as he could. As Nicholas moved through the halls, he targeted random students and staff members, unaliving 17 people in total, 14 students and 3 staff members. By the time he surrendered to the police, he had already made history as one of the worst school unalivers the United States has ever known. Investigators quickly began piecing it all together, and that was when they noticed that Nicholas had been planning the shooting for a long time, and that was based on his own confession. Nicholas had frequently visited chat forums where he talked about the Columbine school shooting, how he was inspired by the 2 school unalivers, and how he wished he could recreate something bigger than that. They also revealed that Nicholas had been expelled from the school previously and held a personal vendetta against anyone and everyone who went there. Still, he did not have a specific target he wanted to unalive. Because of the severity of the case, the prosecution pushed for the maximum punishment, capital punishment. To avoid it, Nicholas and his lawyers agreed to plead guilty to the charges, settling for the lesser sentence of life in
prison. The sergeant was hit, we're told, multiple times in the head.
And you could see the young man slouched in his chair with his face mask on as the victims' families read their impact statement. Even though everyone in the courtroom was high on emotions, Nicholas just seemed unbothered by everything. He knew he had already pled guilty, and there was no way to escape life in prison, so there was no point in apologizing either. Carly Madison Gregg.
The jury sentenced the defendant Carly Madison Gregg to life imprisonment.
15-year-old shooter Carly Gregg sobbing in court as she learned her fate.
Carly Gregg is evil, and...
Did Carly ever butt heads with her mother, Ashley Smiley? Yes, of course she did. Carly, at 14 years old, had become a rebellious teen, but nothing too crazy. She had been found smoking a couple of times and hanging out with the wrong crowd, but Ashley and her did not have a bitter relationship. Everything seemed completely normal. But then, on March 19th, 2024, after coming home from school where Ashley also worked, Carly decided to take her mother's life. Surveillance footage from inside the home shows the mother-daughter duo entering the kitchen together, putting their things down, and making light conversation. Carly stayed there while Ashley went to the other room to work on the computer. That was when Carly started acting suspiciously. She paced around for a while, and then made her way to her mother and stepfather's bedroom, emerged holding something behind her back, and made her way into the room her mother was in. Moments later, screams and gunshots were heard. Carly then emerged from the room, still with something behind her back, made her way to the kitchen, and began texting with her mother's phone. Investigators later claimed she was pretending to be her mother, texted her stepfather, and asked him to come home early. Heath Smiley came home just moments later and was ambushed in the doorway by Carly. She screamed at him and tried to shoot him, hitting him once, but he managed to struggle the gun away from her. Carly, panicked, then ran out of the house from the back door. Heath would later find his deceased wife and made an emotional call to 911, alleging that his 14-year-old stepdaughter had just tried to unalive him. Carly did not make it very far before she was apprehended. In court, her defense attorneys tried to claim she had diagnosed mental illness, but the prosecution claimed it was a thrill, unaliving. They believed that Carly simply wanted to know what it felt like to unalive someone and chose her parents. What made this case even more chilling was Carly's reaction. In a moment, she was seen laughing and smiling with her attorneys, and then, when the 911 call was played, she began crying. Her behavior shifted throughout the entire case, making it seem like she was only sorry when the judge was looking. The judge tried to give Carly a choice between either pleading guilty and receiving 40 years in prison or fight the case and risk life in prison. She chose the second option, thinking her insanity plea would work. It did not. Today, Carly Gregg is locked up for the rest of her life. Mackenzie Sharilla.
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Any questions?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you.
You're innocent.
When the judge read out 17-year-old Mackenzie's sentence, life in prison with parole after 15 years, the courtroom erupted in loud gasps. Her family members yelled out to her, saying that they would fight the case and make sure everyone understood she was innocent. But was she, really? This case takes us back to July of 2022, where Mackenzie was driving her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and their friend, Davion Flanagan, home from a party. Sometime post-midnight, the three of them traveled in Mackenzie's Toyota Camry through Pearl Road into Progress Drive in Strongsville, Ohio. Mackenzie admitted that the trio had smoked a little at the party they had attended, but nothing that would have strongly impaired her judgment. The prosecution played the clip of the car speeding up at the corner before hitting a brick wall. The defense argued that Mackenzie's brakes failed and pointed out how severely injured she was in the crash as well. Even though Dominic and Davion were the ones who had been unalived, it was not like Mackenzie got out uninjured either. The prosecution, however, painted a different picture, not of a shaken-up 17-year-old who had just lost her boyfriend and friend. Friends and family members claimed that Mackenzie and Dominic's relationship had slowly become toxic, and that this was not the first time she had threatened to crash the car with both of them in it. They also revealed that Mackenzie had seemingly surveyed the site of the crash just a few days before the incident. Friends and family members also pointed out that after appearing distraught for a few days, Mackenzie then went out to party, celebrate graduation week, and resume her everyday lifestyle, not consistent with someone who had just been in a near-fatal crash. Obviously, her defense claimed that this was purely speculative, and that there was no way to guarantee she had planned the attack. But the judge did not see it that way, sentencing Mackenzie to the maximum punishment he could. Remy Cordova.
A 14-year-old with a gun. One bump at a red light.
Ma'am, I'm gonna cut your seatbelt, okay? I'm Officer Leffer with the Denver Police Department, okay?
Results in a single mom being gunned down. A furious mother demands answers inside the
14-year-old Remy Cordova was riding in a vehicle with some friends when they got in a minor traffic collision with 32-year-old Pamela Cabriales in 2021. Remy was riding with a few members of a local gang, and he had recently asked to join. According to prosecutors, he shot and unalived Pamela to impress the gang members, or it might have been part of the gang's initiation ritual. In any case, he took out a weapon from his vehicle, approached Pamela, and shot her at point-blank range. He then turned the gun on another driver who had nothing to do with the incident and shot him too. The other driver managed to survive, but Pamela did not. After he was arrested, Remy claimed that it was a case of mistaken identity and that he was not the shooter. He spoke to Pamela's family directly in court, claiming that while he was sorry they lost a family member, he simply could not take accountability for a crime he had not committed. Despite pleading not guilty, The defense also tried to argue that Remy had come from a terrible background. The defense attorney claimed that his client was just as much of a victim as anyone else, reminding everyone in the courtroom of the many cases of neglect filed against Remy's parents. He had no relationship with his father, who was subsequently unalived by gun and gang violence himself, and his mother had a list of mental illnesses. But when Alex Cabriales took the stand, he revealed something that shattered Remy's pleas. He claimed that he had now lost 2 of his siblings to violence. After having already lost an older brother in 1994, Alex claimed that while he was sympathetic with Remy as a troubled teenager, trauma did not equate to taking a life himself. Friends and family members were also critical of the fact that at the time of the unaliving, Remy had been released on parole from a weapons charge. They claimed that had he been held in prison, this would not have happened. In the end, the judge sided with the prosecution and believed that the same mistake should not be repeated. Remy was sentenced in 2024 as an adult to life in prison. Parise, Larry, and Antonio Johnston.
To the behavior expectations I set forth, you need to leave. All right, stop! Stop! Everyone, stop!
Sierra Stewart, Tatiana's grandmother, claimed that she was numb in the aftermath of her 20-year-old granddaughter's unaliving. Parise had recently moved to Fond du Lac to escape the violent life she had experienced in the big city. However, in May 2023, just a few days after she had moved to be with her grandparents, she was unalived. According to Sierra, they were making barbecue in the house, and Tatiana went downstairs to take out the trash. Sometime later, they heard gunshots and realized that someone had unalived their granddaughter. Investigators quickly tied the crime back to 2 teenagers, Antonio Johnston, aged 17, and Parise Larry Jr., aged 14. The shooting was completely random, and investigators did not take too long to apprehend both suspects. When questioned, they claimed that they did not intend to unaliving anyone and were just acting stupid. However, according to the prosecution, both teens had expressed a desire to take someone's life, and the unsuspecting Tatiana became an unsuspecting victim. But then, an 18-year-old who also lived in the same apartment complex claimed that he believed he was the intended target. He claimed that the teens shot at the building site, believing they would hit him, but missed and unalived Tatiana instead. The case gained widespread attention because of the unaliver's age. In court, nearly 3 years after the unaliving, both teens appeared remorseful. Parise spoke to the courtroom, saying, "I'm going to take responsibility for everything that's in this case. And I just want to say sorry to my family and their family. Hope everybody can forgive me for my actions." However, despite his remorse, the courtroom erupted in several confrontations throughout the trial, mostly between Parise's family and Tatiana's. The judge had to adjourn the courtroom several times, holding members from both families in contempt of court. After the first altercation, there was a second one, and the judge decided to recall the case for another day. Clearly, tensions ran high in the courtroom. The judge had enough of the violence inside the courtroom and the violence surrounding the case. Both teens were sentenced to life in prison for their crimes. Even if they claimed they were remorseful, they had still taken a life. Devin Erickson and Alec McKinney.
2 suspects are in custody, 18-year-old Devin Erickson and a 16-year-old teenage girl who prefers to be called Alec McKinney. Both are now being charged as adults.
On May 7, 2019, students at the STEM school Highlands Ranch in Colorado were just days away from graduation, looking forward to the summer break. However, the day took a dark turn when 18-year-old Devin Erickson and his 16-year-old friend Alec McKinney walked into the school carrying guitar cases. But there were no instruments inside those cases. Instead, the 2 teenagers had smuggled in stolen handguns. They entered a classroom where students were watching a movie and suddenly pulled out the weapons. In a split second of absolute heroism, 18-year-old Kendrick Castillo leaped from his desk and lunged directly at Devin, pinning him against the wall. Tragically, Kendrick was unalived in the struggle. 8 other students were injured in the chaos before the unalivers were finally subdued and arrested. Devin tried his hardest to play the victim, with his defense team claiming that the teen was deeply under the influence of substances and that he had been manipulated and threatened by his younger friend into participating. However, Alec told a very different story. Alec eventually pleaded guilty and testified against Devin, revealing that they had both planned to unalive students out of anger and resentment. The prosecution revealed that Devon had willingly broken into his own parents' locked gun safe to arm them both. In July 2020, Alec faced the judge and completely broke down. Alec read a prepared statement through heavy tears, weeping as he apologized to the victims and took full accountability for the horror he had caused. Because he was only 16, Alec was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 40 years. On the other hand, Devon's sentencing hearing in September 2021 was a completely different scene. Kendrick's father, John Castillo, took the stand. He called Devon a coward and a monster for refusing to even look at the people whose lives he had completely shattered. The judge sentenced Devon Erickson to the maximum penalty of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Tamor McIntyre.
His defense argued that physical evidence and witness testimony do not link McIntyre to the crime. The next step is the sentencing phase, which is happening right now. McIntyre faces anywhere between 5 to 99 years in prison.
You might not know him as Tamor McIntyre, but you definitely know him as Tay-K, the young rapper who released the 2017 hit, The Race, which peaked at number 44 on the Billboard charts. But before the song was even released, 16-year-old Tay-K had already sealed his fate when he unalived a 21-year-old during a home invasion. In January 2017, Tay-K was released on house arrest, but he broke off his ankle monitor and went on the run. While on the run, Tay-K managed to unalive someone else as well, a 23-year-old. The prosecution alleged that Tay-K should never have been released on house arrest in the first place, asserting that he was facing unaliving charges and was looking at a minimum of 55 years, even with a lighter sentence. Plus, the prosecution alleged that Tay-K was a high-risk convict, and they believed he would go on the run, which he did. Tay-K's hit, The Race, was also released by his management company while he was on the run, detailing his crime. Ironically, it was the prosecution's smoking gun when he was ultimately apprehended, especially since it detailed everything he had done, from the 2016 unaliving to everything he had done while on the run.
A teen rapper's hit song was used as evidence against him in a murder trial in Fort Worth. Tay-K's song, The Race, climbed the charts 2 years ago, but now prosecutors are hoping it helps send him away for a long time.
That included unaliving someone else, pistol whipping people and robbing them, and threatening them. Tay-K's management company loved the infamy, but it all came to an end in 2019 when he was apprehended, sentenced to life in prison, and ordered to give up the $700,000 he had made from the sale of The Race to the victims and their families. Spotify also removed all of Tay-K's songs, as well as temporarily banned his management group and record label from their platform. Amber Wright and Charlie Ely.
Chair, and they burn, and we can all sit and watch them like they did to him.
15-year-old Seth Jackson thought he was finally getting a second chance with his ex-girlfriend. Amber Wright had been sending him a series of text messages claiming she wanted to work out their relationship issues. She asked him to meet her at a mobile home in Summerfield, Florida, owned by her older friend, Charlie. Seth eagerly made his way there, entirely unaware that he was walking into a trap. Amber's new boyfriend, Michael Bargo, along with a group of other teenagers, was waiting for him. The moment Seth stepped inside, he was ambushed. While Amber and Charlie hid away in a nearby bedroom, the rest of the group viciously attacked and unalived the young boy. The teenagers then burned his remains in a backyard fire pit, scooped the evidence into paint buckets, and tossed them deep into a flooded rock quarry. Investigators quickly unraveled the dark secret when one of the teens involved confessed to his mother. The entire group was arrested, bringing Amber and Charlie face to face with the justice system. During the legal proceedings, both girls tried desperately to play the victim to minimize their involvement. Charlie's defense argued that she was absolutely terrified of Michael Bargo and only allowed the ambush to happen because she feared for her own life. Amber's defense painted her as a naive teenager who simply thought her friends were going to beat Seth up, not actually unalive him. However, the prosecution easily shut down those excuses. They proved that without Charlie providing the location and Amber acting as the bait, the crime would never have happened. When the judges read their fates, the tears finally flowed, but it was too late. Unmoved, the judge sentenced both Amber Wright and Charlie Ely to life in prison. Alyssa Bustamante.
Basically, the main reason for accepting the offer was to avoid the absolute certainty of life without parole. If there was another option, then there would have been no reason to have accepted that offer.
Elizabeth Alton was only 9 years old when she was lured into the woods behind her home in St. Martins, Missouri, stabbed repeatedly, and left to rot in a pre-dug ditch. The unaliver then scribbled in her journal, calling the crime amazing and going about her normal routine, including attending a church dance later that evening. While this might sound shocking, you still have not heard the worst part. The unaliver was a 15-year-old girl named Alyssa. According to friends and family members, Alyssa came from a dysfunctional family and had been living with her grandparents in St. Martins at the time of the crime. Investigators claimed that the attack was completely random and that Elizabeth was not a specific target. She had done nothing to annoy Alyssa. Alyssa simply unalived her because she wanted to experience how it would feel. During the interrogation, however, she broke down, asking her grandmother to leave the room while she confessed to the crime. Alyssa would later confess to everything, with her defense claiming that she was a misguided teen who needed guidance and not jail time. But that did not take away the pain felt by Elizabeth's family, who found her decaying body in the gravesite that Alyssa had dug before the unaliving. That fact alone showed premeditation, according to the prosecution, alleging that this meant she was a calculated unaliver and not a simple, misguided teen. The judge agreed, sentencing Alyssa to prison for the rest of her life. Sarah Johnson.
The perfect all-American family, torn apart by forbidden teenage love.
One day it'd be fine, and then as fast as you could snap your finger, they'd be yelling and screaming.
Then
Diane and Alan Scott Johnson were unalived in their Bellevue home, and their 16-year-old daughter, Sarah Johnson, was missing. Investigators believed she had been kidnapped by whoever had unalived her parents. Search and rescue efforts were dedicated to bringing her home, but Sarah was safe. In fact, she had been the one to unalive her parents. Sarah had reportedly stolen a handgun from the guest house and shot her parents in their bedroom. Why? Allegedly, she had been prohibited from meeting her older, substance-dealing boyfriend. Sarah's trial was sensational. It was one of the worst crimes the city had ever seen, and that too committed by someone so young, seemingly without a clear motive. When interviewed about the crime years later, Sarah expressed regret, but that did not change her life sentence. She is still fighting the case, alleging that she received inadequate counsel. DeMarquise Elkins. On March 21, 2013, Sherry West was just going for a morning walk, pushing her 13-month-old baby, Antonio Santiago, in a stroller down a quiet residential street in Brunswick, Georgia. It was supposed to be a peaceful stroll, but she was suddenly intercepted by two teenagers, 17-year-old DeMarquise Elkins and his 15-year-old friend, Dominique Lang. DeMarquise aggressively demanded Sherry's purse. When she explained that she did not have any money and tried to protect her child, the situation escalated into an absolute nightmare. DeMarquise pulled out a .22 caliber handgun, shot Sherry in the leg, and then ruthlessly pointed the weapon at the stroller, unaliving the innocent baby right in front of his mother. Investigators quickly tracked down the two teenagers, but the case took an even more bizarre and chaotic twist when authorities discovered that DeMarquise's own mother and sister had actively tried to cover up the crime by disposing of the unaliving weapon. The defense tried to argue that the police had coerced witnesses and apprehended the wrong person. DeMarquise just sat there with a chillingly blank, empty expression on his face. His pregnant sister in the gallery completely lost it. Because of his age, capital punishment was off the table, but the judge showed absolutely zero mercy, sentencing DeMarquise Elkins to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Austin Sigg.
In front of my car, and I drove around for probably a good 10-20 minutes. I asked her if she had a cell phone, looked for that.
On October 5, 2012, 10-year-old Jessica Ridgway left her home in Westminster, Colorado, to take the short walk to her elementary school. It was a normal Friday morning, but Jessica never made it to class. A massive search was conducted, involving the community as investigators and volunteers searched through the area for any sign of the young girl. Tragically, just a few days later, her remains were discovered. For weeks, police searched for a suspect until a shocking 911 call cracked the case wide open. The caller was Mindy Sigg, a terrified mother who was turning in her own 17-year-old son, Austin Sigg. Austin had confessed that he was the one who had abducted and unalived Jessica. When investigators brought him in, Austin admitted to the crime, revealing a disturbing fascination with unaliving people. He even confessed to a previous attempted kidnapping of a jogger that had left the community on edge months prior. Austin pleaded guilty to the charges. Grieving family members dressed in purple, Jessica's favorite color, on the day of the hearing. The judge handed down the maximum penalty allowed, sentencing Austin Sigg to life in prison with an additional 86 years. Daniel Marsh.
Every time I look at someone, I see flashes of images of me killing them in numerous ways, in numerous horrible ways, doing terrible things. I can't help it.
In April 2013, 15-year-old Daniel Marsh unalived an elderly couple, Claudia Maupin and Oliver Northup, inside their home in Davis, California. Daniel gained entry to the residence during the night by cutting through a window screen. He armed himself with a hunting knife, stabbed the sleeping victims a combined total of over 120 times, and mutilated their bodies before leaving the scene. Daniel was apprehended several months later after bragging about the crime to a friend who informed law enforcement. During his police interrogation, Daniel provided a detailed confession. He stated that he had experienced unaliving urges and committed the slayings simply to see what it felt like. He displayed a lack of remorse during the interview. Daniel was charged as an adult with 2 counts of first-degree unaliving. In September 2014, a jury convicted him on all charges. The judge sentenced Marsh to 52 years to life in state prison. In 2018, California passed a bill prohibiting the prosecution of teens as adults. This temporarily resulted in Daniel's case going back to juvenile court. However, the courts ultimately upheld his adult conviction and sentence. Today, he remains incarcerated. Thomas Lane.
Saying pull the trigger that killed your son, now it masturbates to memory. Love you.
All right, that's all your client has to say, Mr. Friedman.
Yes, Your Honor.
On February 27, 2012, students at Chardon High School in Ohio were sitting in the cafeteria, waiting for their morning classes to begin. It seemed like a perfectly normal Monday until 17-year-old Thomas Lane walked into the room. TJ was not actually a student at Chardon High, but he waited there every morning for a bus to his alternative school. Without any warning, he pulled a .22 caliber handgun from his bag and began firing into a table of unsuspecting students. By the time the horrifying incident was over, 3 innocent students had been unalived and 3 others were severely injured. T.J. fled the school grounds but was quickly apprehended by authorities. He completely admitted to the shooting, claiming that he had a personal vendetta against one of the students he had unalived. T.J. claimed that the other student had asked him for a fight and that he had previously threatened him on the school bus. On that day, T.J. planned on unaliving him and also shot his friends. He then later shot 2 people at random. One of his victims is now paralyzed for the rest of his life. The scene was horrific, and everyone was shocked. But TJ refused to accept any responsibility for what he had done. And, shockingly, the worst was still to come. During his hearing, TJ revealed a white shirt with the word Unilever scribbled on it. He then asked to speak to the victims' families directly, but instead of apologizing, TJ made a crude gesture and gave them the middle finger. This shocked everyone in the courtroom and proved there was no rehabilitation. TJ Lane was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without parole.